The crystalline chandeliers in the Grand Plaza Hotel's lobby cast prismatic shadows across marble floors, their light dancing off brass fixtures and mahogany panels. It was that peculiar hour when night begins its slow surrender to dawn, when even Manhattan's restless pulse seemed to quiet. The night manager, Thomas Hayes, stood at his post behind the front desk, his perfectly pressed uniform a testament to the hotel's unwavering standards. The soft hum of the climate control system and the distant whir of elevator cables were the only sounds breaking the pre-dawn silence. That silence shattered when the hotel's revolving doors began to spin, their mechanical rhythm faltering as something massive pushed through. The motion sensors flickered frantically, and a gust of winter air swept across the lobby. Thomas's hand froze mid-signature on the night report as Aurora entered. A horse of such pristine white that she seemed to emit her own luminescence. Her hooves, each step deliberate and measured, struck the marble with a sound like distant thunder. The security guard, Mike Reynolds, reached for his radio but found himself unable to move, transfixed by the creature's presence. Aurora stood nearly 17 hands high, her coat gleaming under the chandelier light, her mane flowing like liquid silver. But it was her eyes that held everyone motionless, deep pools of ancient wisdom that seemed to peer straight through to the soul. Should I call animal control?" whispered Sarah Chen, the junior concierge, her voice barely audible over the sound of her own racing heart. But even as she spoke, there was something in Aurora's bearing that defied such mundane intervention. The horse moved with purpose, her ears forward, her gait steady and sure, as if she were merely following a path visible only to her. The night cleaning crew emerged from the service elevator, their equipment forgotten as they watched the scene unfold. A few early rising guests, drawn by the commotion, peered over the mezzanine railing, their phones raised to capture what surely must be some elaborate publicity stunt or film shoot. But there were no cameras, no directors shouting "cut," no explanation for the magnificent creature now making her way toward the grand staircase. The lobby's crystal chandeliers began to pulse, their light dimming and brightening in an otherworldly rhythm that seemed to match Aurora's footsteps. The air grew thick with anticipation, charged with an energy that made the hair on the back of Thomas's neck stand on end. He had worked the night shift at the Grand Plaza for 15 years, had seen celebrities and royalty pass through these halls, but never had he felt such a presence. Aurora paused at the foot of the stairs, her head held high, nostrils flaring slightly as if catching some scent imperceptible to human senses. The security cameras in the corner swiveled to follow her movement, their red recording lights blinking in confused patterns. The horse's tail swished once, twice, and then she began to ascend. "That's impossible," muttered Mike, watching as Aurora navigated the wide marble steps with impossible grace. Horses can't climb stairs like that. But the word impossible seemed to have lost its meaning in the face of what they were witnessing. The night air grew colder, and the lobby's massive windows began to fog, creating a dreamlike barrier between the hotel and the sleeping city beyond. Aurora's ascent continued, each step echoing through the now silent space. The guests who had gathered to watch found themselves holding their breath, caught in the gravity of a moment they couldn't explain but somehow understood was profound. 17 floors above, in Suite 1742, machines beeped their steady electronic vigil over little Peter Morrison. Dr. Vincent Carter stood by the window, his reflection in the glass looking as haggard as he felt. 20 years of emergency medicine hadn't prepared him for this night. He'd been staying at the hotel for a medical conference when the call came. A baby in distress. No time to wait for an ambulance. The suite had been transformed into a makeshift medical ward, equipment borrowed from the conference's display hall somehow finding its way to where it was needed most. Nurse Lauren Thompson, another conference attendee, checked the infant's vitals for the 100th time, her experienced hands gentle but worried. Peter lay still, his tiny chest rising and falling with mechanical assistance. 6 months old, and already fighting a battle that seemed too large for his small frame. In the adjacent Suite 1744, separated by a connecting door, his father James lay in a medically induced coma, the victim of a tragic accident that had left both father and son clinging to life in this unlikely place. Lauren pressed her palm against Peter's forehead, feeling the fever that refused to break. "His temperature's rising again," she said, her voice carrying the weight of too many hours spent watching hope slip away. Dr. Carter moved from the window, his footsteps heavy with fatigue and the burden of what he knew he had to say. The monitors cast their pale blue light across the room, their readings telling a story that medical science could no longer rewrite. The night pressed against the windows, the city lights below twinkling like distant stars, indifferent to the drama unfolding in their midst. And then they heard it, the sound of hooves on carpet, echoing through the corridor outside. Lauren looked up, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Did you hear that?" Dr. Carter nodded slowly, already moving toward the door. The sound grew closer, accompanied by a presence that seemed to seep through the walls themselves. The medical equipment began to react, their steady rhythms faltering, then stabilizing into new patterns. In the adjacent suite, James's monitors also shifted, their electronic songs changing tempo. His fingers, motionless for days, twitched slightly, as if reaching for something just beyond grasp. The corridor outside fell silent. Lauren held her breath, watching as the door handle began to turn, moved by forces unseen. The door swung open with a whisper, revealing Aurora standing in the hallway, her white coat luminous in the dim light, her eyes fixed on the small form in the medical bed. The horse's presence filled the room, making it feel simultaneously vast and intimate. The machine's beeping faded to background noise as Aurora stepped forward, her movements liquid grace despite the confined space. She lowered her head toward Peter, and the air between them seemed to shimmer with possibility. Lauren found herself reaching for Dr. Carter's arm, seeking an anchor in a moment that defied all medical training. The horse's breath stirred Peter's fine hair, and the child, who hadn't moved voluntarily for hours, turned his head slightly toward the touch. The monitors began to show new readings, subtle at first, then more pronounced. Peter's oxygen levels improved, his heart rate strengthened, his fever began to break. In the next room, James's vital signs also shifted, as if father and son were being drawn back to life by the same mysterious tide. Aurora remained still, standing guard over the child while the impossible unfolded around her. The city continued its nocturnal dance outside the windows, unaware that within these walls, science and mystery had merged into something beyond understanding. Dr. Carter moved to check the readings, his scientific mind struggling to process what he was witnessing. I've never seen anything like this," he whispered, more to himself than to Lauren. The numbers didn't lie. Peter was improving, his vital signs strengthening with each passing moment. Through the connecting door, they heard movement from James's room. Lauren rushed to check on him, leaving Dr. Carter alone with Aurora and Peter. The horse hadn't moved, her presence both protective and nurturing, like a guardian angel manifested in physical form. The night air grew warmer, softer somehow, as if the very atmosphere was being transformed by what was transpiring. The city lights seemed to pulse in rhythm with Peter's strengthening heartbeat, and somewhere in the distance, church bells began to toll the approaching dawn. James's first conscious words were his son's name, spoken with a father's desperate love. Lauren helped him sit up, supporting him as awareness returned. His eyes found the connecting door, drawn by an understanding that transcended his confused state. The machines monitoring Peter now sang with healthy readings, their digital displays telling a story of recovery that defied medical explanation. Aurora finally lifted her head, turning slightly to acknowledge James as he appeared in the doorway, leaning heavily on Lauren for support. Father and son, separated by tragedy but united by something beyond comprehension, were together again. Aurora stepped back, her task complete though her presence still filled the room with an otherworldly grace. The first rays of dawn began to pierce the city's skyline, catching her white coat and transforming it into living light. Dr. Carter found himself blinking back tears, his years of medical skepticism dissolving in the face of what he'd witnessed. Lauren helped James to his son's bedside, where Peter's eyes opened for the first time in days, bright and clear and full of life. Aurora moved toward the door with the same purposeful grace that had marked her arrival. The hotel staff, gathered in the hallway, parted to let her pass. She made her way back through the corridors and down the grand staircase, her hooves still striking that impossible rhythm on marble and carpet. The lobby fell silent once more as she approached the revolving doors. The early morning light streamed through the windows, casting her shadow in multiple directions, as if reality itself couldn't quite contain her presence. And then she was gone, leaving behind a story that would be told and retold, though never quite captured in words. In Suite 1742, Peter reached for his father's hand as dawn broke over Manhattan. The machines continued their steady symphony of recovery, their readings a testament to something that touched the edge of miracle. Dr. Carter and Lauren exchanged glances, knowing their understanding of the world had been fundamentally altered. The Grand Plaza Hotel returned to its normal rhythm as the morning shift arrived, finding their night colleagues changed in subtle ways. Thomas Hayes finished his interrupted night report, though how does one document the undocumentable? The security cameras had captured only static during Aurora's visit, as if some things were meant to remain in the realm of mystery and faith. James held his son, feeling the strength returning to both their bodies. The morning sun painted the room in shades of gold, and in the quiet of that new day, father and son began their journey back to life, watched over by the memory of a guardian whose hoofprints had marked not just the hotel's floors, but the very fabric of reality itself. Lauren finally sat down, exhaustion catching up with her as the adrenaline faded. She looked at Dr. Carter, who was still staring at the medical readings in disbelief. "Sometimes," she said softly, "science isn't enough to explain everything." Dr. Carter nodded, understanding that his world would never be quite the same. Outside, New York City awakened to a new day, unaware that within the walls of the Grand Plaza, the boundary between the ordinary and the extraordinary had been breached, leaving behind a story of hope, healing, and the mysteries that exist just beyond the edge of understanding. The morning staff began their routines, the hotel's elegant machinery turning over for another day. But those who had witnessed Aurora's visit moved differently now, their steps a little lighter, their smiles a little wider, carrying with them the knowledge that sometimes, in the darkest hours, miracles arrive on silent hooves, bringing with them the power to heal not just the body, but the soul. The weeks that followed transformed the Grand Plaza in subtle yet profound ways. The spot where Aurora had first entered became an unspoken point of reverence. Guests would sometimes pause there, feeling an inexplicable warmth, an echo of something magnificent. The security guards swore the marble still held a faint trace of her hoofprints, visible only when the morning light struck at just the right angle. Thomas Hayes found himself lingering at the front desk during his shifts, his eyes drawn to the revolving doors more often than necessary. He'd taken to keeping a small notebook, jotting down the strange occurrences that seemed to multiply after that night. The way the chandeliers would sometimes pulse in rhythm with no discernible cause, the unexplained scent of summer meadows that would waft through the lobby on the coldest winter nights. Peter grew stronger with each passing day, his recovery defying every medical prediction. Dr. Carter, who had revised his initial report dozens of times, finally settled for documenting the bare facts, knowing that the truth lay somewhere beyond the reach of medical terminology. He'd taken to visiting the hotel regularly, drawn by something he couldn't quite name, spending hours in the lobby watching the interplay of light and shadow, searching for glimpses of the extraordinary in the ordinary. Lauren had transferred to a nearby hospital, requesting the night shift by choice now. She felt most alive in those quiet hours before dawn, when the boundary between the possible and impossible seemed thinnest. Sometimes, during her breaks, she would walk to the Grand Plaza and sit in the lobby, exchanging knowing glances with Thomas, both of them guardians of a secret that had changed them forever. James and Peter became regular fixtures at the hotel, drawn back by an invisible thread of memory and miracle. Peter, now taking his first toddling steps, would often stop at the foot of the grand staircase, pointing upward with a laugh that seemed to contain echoes of that extraordinary night. James would watch his son, remembering how close they had come to losing everything, how a mysterious guardian had galloped through the barriers between worlds to bring them back. The hotel's reputation subtly shifted. While it maintained its five-star luxury status, whispers began to circulate about its other qualities. Guests reported strange dreams of white horses and healing light. Others spoke of feeling unexpectedly renewed after their stays, as if the very air held restorative properties. The Grand Plaza became known as a place where the impossible didn't seem quite so far-fetched, where the membrane between the mundane and the miraculous was remarkably thin. Sarah Chun, the junior concierge who had witnessed Aurora's arrival, found her role evolving. Guests would seek her out, drawn by something in her demeanor that suggested she knew more than she could say. She became an unofficial keeper of stories, collecting tales of unusual occurrences. The sound of hooves in empty corridors, the way certain rooms seemed to hold their own light, the dreams that guests in Suite 1742 reported, dreams of flying over endless fields beneath a star-filled sky. Mike Reynolds retired from security but couldn't quite leave. He took a part-time position as a night doorman, preferring to stay connected to the place where his understanding of the world had been fundamentally altered. On quiet nights, he would tell new employees about Aurora, watching their skepticism fade as the hotel worked its subtle magic on them too. The city continued its relentless pace outside the hotel's walls, but within the Grand Plaza, time moved differently now. The Grand Lobby had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where the harried and hopeless would find themselves drawn, sensing perhaps that here, in this intersection of worlds, anything was possible. As years passed, the story of Aurora became part of the hotel's unofficial history, whispered between staff members during quiet moments, shared with wide-eyed new hires during their training. The official records showed nothing unusual, just a remarkable recovery of a father and son on a winter's night. But the truth lived in the heartbeats of those who had witnessed it, in the very walls of the building, in the way the light still sometimes caught the marble floors and turned them to liquid silver, as if remembering the touch of holy hooves. Dr. Carter eventually published a paper on unexplained recoveries in medical literature, carefully omitting specific details but hinting at forces beyond current scientific understanding. It became his most cited work, not for its conclusions, but for its questions, for the spaces it left between the lines where other medical professionals could insert their own encounters with the inexplicable. Lauren developed a reputation among her colleagues for an almost supernatural ability to predict patient outcomes. She could never explain how she knew, but after witnessing Aurora's miracle, she had developed a deeper sensitivity to the currents of life and death, to the subtle signs that indicated whether a patient would survive against all odds. The hotel's guest books began to fill with curious entries, stories of dreams and visions, of unexplained healings and renewed hope. Management quietly decided to preserve these books rather than replace them, understanding that they were documenting something precious and rare. The continued echo of a miracle that had chosen their establishment as its staging ground. James brought Peter to the hotel every year on the anniversary of that night. They would sit in the lobby, sometimes for hours, Peter growing taller and stronger with each visit, but never losing that special connection to the place where his life had been saved. As he grew older, he began to paint, creating stunning images of white horses and healing light that captured something of the ineffable quality of that long-ago night. The Grand Plaza had always been more than just a hotel. It was a repository of stories, a keeper of secrets, a way station for travelers seeking more than just a place to rest. But now it had become something else as well. A reminder that the world was wider and deeper than it appeared, that miracles could arrive on silent hooves in the darkest hours of the night, and that some stories, once written into the fabric of reality, never truly end but continue to ripple outward, touching lives in ways that can never be fully measured or understood. The hotel's influence began to extend beyond its physical boundaries. People who had never set foot inside the Grand Plaza found themselves drawn to its legend, making pilgrimages from across the country and even overseas. They came seeking something they couldn't quite name: healing, hope, or perhaps just a glimpse of the extraordinary. The sidewalk outside would often be crowded with people simply standing still, their faces turned upward, feeling for some echo of Aurora's presence. Local artists began incorporating the hotel into their work. Painters set up their easels across the street, trying to capture the way the light played differently around the building's architecture. Musicians claimed the acoustics in the lobby had changed, that notes held longer and harmonies blended more perfectly than they should. A composer wrote a symphony inspired by the story, with a haunting melody that seemed to capture the sound of ghostly hooves on marble. The medical community couldn't ignore the phenomena any longer. Research teams approached the hotel with proposals to study the unexplained events that continued to occur within its walls. They brought their instruments and their skepticism, setting up monitoring equipment in Suite 1742 and the surrounding areas. The readings they collected defied conventional explanation: unusual electromagnetic patterns, inexplicable energy signatures, and air composition that shifted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Peter, now in medical school himself, had become a bridge between the scientific and the miraculous. His lectures on the intersection of conventional medicine and unexplained healing drew standing-room-only crowds. He spoke with the authority of someone who had lived the impossible, his own life a testament to forces beyond current medical understanding. His research papers, combining rigorous methodology with an openness to mystery, were creating a new framework for studying phenomena that defied traditional classification. James had found a new calling as well. He established a foundation dedicated to supporting families facing similar medical crises, helping them find hope in their darkest hours. The foundation's offices, located just across from the Grand Plaza, became a sanctuary of their own. A place where the impossible didn't seem quite so far away, where stories of unexpected healing were met with understanding rather than skepticism. The hotel staff developed an unofficial protocol for handling what they called aurora events, those moments when the ordinary fabric of reality seemed to thin, when the unexplainable made itself known in subtle ways. They learned to recognize the signs. The slight change in air pressure, the way the chandeliers would begin to pulse with their own rhythm, the sudden silence that would fall over the lobby as if the building itself were holding its breath. Sarah Chin, now the hotel's general manager, had transformed the way the Grand Plaza operated. Under her guidance, the hotel became known for its unique approach to hospitality, one that acknowledged the mysterious while maintaining the highest standards of luxury service. She hired staff members not just for their professional qualifications, but for their ability to sense the extraordinary in the ordinary, to hold space for guests experiencing their own encounters with the inexplicable. The city's architectural community began studying the hotel's design, fascinated by how the building seemed to have adapted to its role as a threshold between worlds. They discovered that the geometric patterns in the marble floors formed unexpected configurations, that the angles of light and shadow created shapes that shouldn't have been possible according to conventional physics. The hotel had become a subject of study in architectural schools, with students attempting to map its subtle energetic pathways and unexpected acoustical properties. Dr. Carter and Lauren had started a quiet revolution in their respective fields. Their experiences at the Grand Plaza had led them to develop new approaches to patient care, ones that left room for the inexplicable while maintaining professional rigor. They began teaching these methods to others, creating a network of healthcare providers who understood that healing sometimes arrived through unexpected channels. The hotel's story began appearing in unexpected places: medical journals, architectural digests, parapsychology studies, and even physics papers attempting to explain the unexplainable. Each field found its own language for describing what had happened there, but none could fully capture the essence of what the Grand Plaza had become. A place where the boundaries between the possible and impossible had become permanently blurred. The revolving doors continued their endless dance, ushering in new guests who might or might not recognize they were entering more than just a hotel. The marble floors still held their secret patterns, the chandeliers their mysterious rhythms. And sometimes, in those quietest hours before dawn, when the city's pulse slowed and the veil between worlds grew thin, those who were present might catch the faintest echo of offbeats, a reminder that miracles don't just happen once and end, they continue to unfold, their effects rippling outward through time and space, touching lives in ways that can never be predicted or fully understood. The Grand Plaza had become a nexus point, a place where the extraordinary had taken up permanent residence within the ordinary. Its story continued to evolve, each new day bringing fresh revelations, each guest adding their own thread to the tapestry of wonder that had begun on that winter night when a white horse named Aurora had decided that the boundaries between worlds were more permeable than anyone had imagined. As the years turned to decades, the hotel's influence grew in unexpected ways. Universities began offering fellowships for scholars to study what they called the Grand Plaza phenomenon. Physicists discovered that the building's coordinates aligned with previously unknown geometric patterns in the city's electromagnetic field. Anthropologists documented how the hotel had spawned its own unique culture, complete with rituals and traditions that had evolved organically among staff and regular guests. The hotel's library, once a simple collection of books for guests' entertainment, transformed into an archive of the extraordinary. Leather-bound volumes filled with first-hand accounts of unexplained events lined the shelves. Researchers would spend months poring over these records, tracking patterns in the mysterious occurrences that seemed to cluster around certain dates and locations within the building. Peter's medical career had evolved beyond traditional practice. He now headed a groundbreaking research institute dedicated to studying what he called threshold medicine, the intersection of conventional healthcare and inexplicable healing events. The institute, housed in a newly constructed wing of the Grand Plaza, attracted brilliant minds from around the world who sensed that traditional medical paradigms were only part of a larger picture. The hotel's architecture had begun to exhibit strange properties that defied explanation. Rooms would occasionally shift their dimensions ever so slightly, corridors would seem longer or shorter depending on the observer's state of mind, and certain spaces appeared to hold memories that could be accessed under the right conditions. Architects and engineers studied these anomalies with a mixture of frustration and wonder, their instruments recording measurements that shouldn't have been possible. Sarah Chin's management style had become the subject of business school case studies. She had developed a unique approach to hospitality that acknowledged and worked with the hotel's unusual properties. Staff members were trained not just in customer service, but in what she called threshold awareness, the ability to recognize and facilitate moments when the extraordinary might manifest. The Grand Plaza's influence extended into the art world in profound ways. A new school of painting emerged, characterized by attempts to capture the hotel's shifting qualities of light and space. Musicians spoke of melodies that seemed to compose themselves in the lobby, of harmonies that existed just at the edge of human hearing. Poets and writers found their words taking unexpected turns when they worked within the hotel's walls, as if the building itself were collaborating in their creative process. Dr. Carter's legacy lived on through a new generation of medical practitioners who understood that science and mystery were not mutually exclusive. The hospital where he had finished his career had become known for its innovative approach to patient care, incorporating spaces of silence and contemplation alongside the latest medical technology. His final papers, published shortly before his retirement, proposed a framework for understanding healing as a phenomenon that existed in the overlap between the explainable and the mysterious. Lauren's nursing protocols had been adopted by hospitals across the country, though few understood their true origin. She had developed techniques for creating what she called aurora spaces within medical facilities, rooms where the boundaries between the ordinary and extraordinary became more permeable, where healing seemed to accelerate for reasons that defied conventional explanation. James's foundation had grown into an international organization, with branches in major cities around the world. Each location was chosen for its unique, energetic properties, each building designed to incorporate elements that echoed the Grand Plaza's remarkable architecture. The foundation had become known not just for its practical support of families in medical crisis, but for its role in facilitating unexplained healings and recoveries. The hotel's reputation had spread far beyond New York, attracting visitors from every corner of the globe. Some came seeking healing, others hoping to study the phenomena, and still others simply drawn by an inexplicable pull they couldn't quite name. The Grand Plaza had become a pilgrimage site of sorts, though what exactly people were paying homage to varied with each visitor. Scientists had begun to propose new theories about the nature of reality itself based on observations made at the hotel. The way space and time seemed to bend within its walls, the strange quantum readings their instruments recorded, the way consciousness itself seemed to operate differently within its sphere of influence, all suggested that the building had become more than just a structure of steel and stone. The revolving doors continued their eternal dance, but now they seemed to turn between more than just inside and outside. Guests reported catching glimpses of other places, other times, in the mirrors that lined the lobby. The marble floors had developed patterns that shifted and changed when no one was looking directly at them. The The chandeliers had learned to respond to the emotions of those who passed beneath them, their light dimming or brightening in subtle sympathy. Local legends began to incorporate the Grand Plaza into their mythology. Children would dare each other to spend a night in the lobby, hoping to catch a glimpse of Aurora's ghost. Street artists created murals depicting the white horse ascending the grand staircase, their work capturing something of the magical quality that still lingered in the air. The hotel had become a living entity in its own right, breathing with the collective memories and experiences of all who passed through its doors. Its story had outgrown its origins, becoming something larger and more profound, a testament to the possibility that reality itself was more fluid, more magical than anyone had dared to imagine. And sometimes, on very special nights when the moon was full and the city held its breath, those who knew what to look for might catch a glimpse of something extraordinary. A flash of white in the corner of their eye, the sound of hooves on marble, a sense of presence that suggested Aurora had never really left. She had simply expanded her territory, becoming as much a part of the Grand Plaza as the steel in its bones and the stories in its walls. The hotel stood as a monument to the night when the impossible had galloped through its doors and never truly left, a reminder that some stories don't end but continue to grow, reaching out through time and space to touch lives in ways that could never be predicted or fully understood. The Grand Plaza had become more than a hotel, more than a building. It had become a gateway to possibility itself, a place where the extraordinary had found a permanent home within the ordinary world.